And we are back with more on News Talk Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on this edition of the Mark Petrona Show. Well, as the banner there reads, a legal win for Canada's energy sector, certainly a win for Alberta. The decision is that the Alberta Court of Appeal has ruled that the Impact Assessment Act, what has been commonly known as the No More Pipelines Bill, is in fact unconstitutional. In the ruling, the highest court in Alberta has ruled that the legislation poses a real threat to the division of powers. Well, what does that mean? It means that it infringes on the power of the provinces to deal with resources, which of course it has oversight over resources. And so why is the federal government imposing this bill that would restrict the rolling out of pipelines? And great guy to bring on the show for this is somebody who's been writing about environmental issues, about energy issues for quite some time in his blog. Parker Gallant Energy Perspectives blog is the name of it. And you should definitely check it out. And I know that Parker has gotten wind of this key decision. Parker, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, Mark.
All right, so let's listen a little bit to the announcement in the House, House of Commons, where Candice Bergen, the interim leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, stood up and said this.
Conservatives have always opposed Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill. It's kneecapped Canada's ability to develop and export our natural resources and kill jobs across the country. Bill C-69 was bad for Canada and, frankly, the world because of its negative effects. Alberta's top court has just ruled C-69 as unconstitutional. Will the Liberals now reverse this terrible piece of legislation, let Canadians get back to work, build pipelines, and sell our energy to the world?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Impact Assessment Act delivered on an important promise we made to Canadians to reform a broken system and restore public trust in how decisions about major projects are made. The previous Conservative government gutted environmental protections, eroded public trust,
My gosh, what a lie that is.
And made it harder, not easier, for major projects to be built.
Man, what a disgusting lie that is. I mean, how long did they try to get Energy East through? I mean, the Northern Gateway project. Governments fought tooth and nail trying to pass those key projects. If they had passed Northern Gateway, we'd be able to sell our oil products around the world, including as a way to offset Russian oil sales to Europe and places like that. So that in and of itself is, on the face of it, a bald-faced lie. But this is a win. But I don't think it's going to stop the Trudeau government from continuing to kneecap Canada's energy sector. What do you think about all this?
Well, I think
Parker?
the same thing. I mean, on your latter point, my belief is that the feds will appeal this for sure, and hope that the federal Supreme Court will rule against Alberta's Supreme Court. But that's going to be in the future. But I have to agree that it is unconstitutional because the provinces have the right to manage their resources, and oil and natural gas is one of the resources that Alberta has, and but the only time that the feds can get involved is when a pipeline or a electric grid crosses a border. That's the only time they're actually can get involved. But Alberta should be able to do what it wants to do now in terms of creating pipelines to the south at least. And if they have other provinces that are in agreement, to the left or the right of them, presumably they could do that as well.
Here's Jason Kenney's tweet. The No More Pipelines Act, Bill C-69, has been ruled unconstitutional by Alberta's Court of Appeal in a major 4-1 decision, a historic and central part of our strategy to fight for a fair deal. I don't know. I don't think the fight for a fair deal is certainly over by any stretch. I mean, not as long as you've got a radical government in Ottawa that's going to continue putting a stick into the spokes of Canada's energy sector, even as we continue to import oil from other countries. I mean, the lunacy of this on the face of it is ridiculous. We could be producing our own oil. And I know that Pierre Poilievre, who's running for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, has made a point just today talking about how ludicrous it is that we are paying the high prices we are, and how he blames federal government policies. Among other things, of course, we have the carbon tax, which I know you've talked about. But just the fact that we have served to kneecap our oil sector, our resource sector, in the way that the Trudeau government has done over the years, has caused enormous amounts of damage and is hurting consumers right now. I mean, you guys feeling it right now out where you are in Prince Edward County. Is that a fair statement there,
Yeah,
Parker?
I filled up my tank yesterday, and I was shocked at the final price, $105 to fill my car up. So yeah, I was shocked, and it's
Wow.
It's going to go higher according to Dan McTagg, the gas price wizard. You mentioned the fact that we can't get pipelines through, but I was reading the Montreal Economic Institute, I think, did a survey. They had one of the major survey companies do a survey in Quebec, and surprisingly, a lot of Quebecers, majority Quebecers favor buying oil and gas from our own producers, which is Alberta. But instead, they're going to import it from Venezuela and, Saudi Arabia, all those countries that, are not democratic societies by any stretch of the imagination. So, I mean, what Trudeau and his crew are doing is just incredible. All of the efforts to get to net zero by 2050, for God's sakes.
Yeah, it's absolute lunacy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to happen anyway. But it is interesting how the war in Ukraine has helped kind of bring this issue to the fore. Because, of course, the left, Trudeau, has largely been trying to use the issue of Ukraine, Russia's attack on Ukraine, as saying, well, that's the reason why prices are where they are. But in fact, energy prices were rising even before Putin went into Ukraine. Here's an exchange between Pierre Poilievre and Stephen Guilbeault, the environment minister. You're not standing up to Putin. You're helping fill his war chest, blocking our energy, forcing Europe to buy from Russia. Had your government not killed Energy East pipeline and not banned the province of Quebec natural gas, we'd help Europe defund Putin today, build pipelines and paychecks now. And that was in response to what Guilbeault had said, which is Mr. Poilievre is once again using a crisis overseas to stoke fear and spread misinformation at home. That's not okay. Russia's deplorable war is driving up the price of gas for people around the world. So there you go. Yeah. There it is. His government, the government of Justin Trudeau, Guilbeault is the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Yeah. And he's pointing fingers and saying, well, it's all Poilievre's fault for, talking about this stuff, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. But I think Poilievre is absolutely right. I mean, if we had built out our energy, our infrastructure, our ability to sell, because right now, as you well know, Parker, in terms of our oil sales, we basically have one customer. It's the United States.
Yes.
And they are a price maker, meaning they can really dictate the price. They're not paying world prices for our energy right now.
No, and the other thing is that the Canadian dollar has suffered. It's dropped quite a bit against the US dollar, and that impacts the price of gasoline because it's priced internationally. We don't set the price. The price is set by the market, if you will, the international market. So, why, Guilbeault comes out and says what he says is, crazy, especially after they've imposed the carbon tax on us and driven up the prices. And they even, they increased that carbon tax on April the 1st, for God's sakes. And another big one's coming.
Yeah. Do you know when the next one is?
The next one, I think, is near the end of the year. I think November or something like that, or December. Yeah, and it's going to drive it up by about another 10 to 15 cents a liter.
I mean, this is absolute lunacy.
Yeah.
And it's like they want to blame everybody else but themselves for the fact that people are paying more for energy, paying more for groceries, any excuse, right? So we have the prime minister going to Ukraine, look at me. I'm on the world stage talking about all this stuff. Meantime, if they had done the right thing and allowed the rolling out, the building out of our infrastructure, then we would not be anywhere near the mess that we're in terms of paying what we are. Consumers would have been a lot better off. But sadly, we're not better off. And Canada, I think, is a global laughingstock. I mean, you can understand countries that don't produce their own oil being in the situation they're in, having to, fork out big bucks for fuel. But they look at Canada and go, well, wait a minute, you've got all this oil. I think we're the number 3 country in the world, are we not?
We are reserves. Yeah.
I mean, that's absolutely outrageous.
Yeah.
That's absolutely outrageous. And so people, the government wants to blame the Russians. Why aren't we using more of our own oil? If we had energy east, if we had pipelines going deeper into, say, Ontario, Quebec, right across the country, delivering that oil from Alberta, but they always use the excuse of climate change. As far as I can tell, Parker, it makes no sense whatsoever bringing oil in via tanker from places like Africa, the Arab countries, Venezuela, bringing it over via tanker. Do you understand? How can that be better for the environment? But then by building our own infrastructure, our own pipelines, which are way safer, much more safer than either rail or tankers.
Yes.
Does any of this make sense to you?
No, it doesn't. And the other thing that's going on, of course, is Line 5, which brings in natural gas and light crude into Ontario, and principally a lot of it goes to Sarnia, and the light crude at Easton is refined there, whereas the natural gas is turned into propane, and propane supplies an awful lot of households, rural households in Ontario and Michigan as well, with propane to keep their houses warm during the cold winters. And the funny thing is that I read an article recently that was in Sarnia Today, I think it was called, a local paper, and it basically said that Steve Gilbert and the previous Gilbo, yes, I'm sorry.
Gilbo. That's all right.
And the previous Minister of the Environment, Mr. Wilkinson, both supported Line 5 staying open. So they don't want to close that one down. Maybe because they heat their homes with natural gas. You never know. But I mean,
Well, I think that would have been an outrage if they had opposed Line 5, knowing what a critical piece of infrastructure that is. Maybe for those who don't know, explain what Line 5 actually does and why the United States, Michigan specifically, under their lunatic governor, whatever her name is, Gretchen Whitmer, have opposed Line 5. I mean, it cuts off a little bit, goes through part of Michigan, does it not, in order on its way to Ontario?
It goes, through the Mackinac Straits, which is, where a lake on Lake Superior and Lake Huron meet, if you will, up there in the northern part of Michigan and in Ontario. So the pipeline goes underneath there, and it's been operating for decades, literally. And it provides, as I said, natural gas and light crude. And the whole issue really is that if that line is shut, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to spend, cold winters, not being able to heat their homes, or they'll have to switch to electricity. And the funny thing is that what we do here in Ontario is we generate a surplus of electricity. And a lot of that is exported to Michigan, and they pay next to nothing for that power. And so my view is that Doug Ford and the guys up there in Ottawa, like Trudeau and Guilbeault, should tell Michigan and Whitmer in particular that if she shuts the Line 5 down, if she's successful, then we're going to stop shipping that cheap electricity to her.
Yeah.
That keeps
Well,
the
it's in the courts, right? It's still in the courts. From what I recall, the Trudeau government waited until like the last minute before they finally launched some kind of legal fight against it. They waited as long as they possibly could for no reason whatsoever that made any sense. But it is locked in the courts. Have you been keeping an eye on that?
Well, we won
proceeding?
actually because there's an agreement between Canada and the United States that goes back decades that says, no one, provincial or state governments, cannot interfere with the pipelines, and that's what was used to make that go through. But Whitmer has tried to find another way to shut them down. So she's going after some of the First Nations in Wisconsin, I think it is, to go after Enbridge to shut it down. And they're going to take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the reason they claim is because there was an agreement with all the First Nations where it crosses through their land, but that hasn't been renewed. So, the fascinating thing about Line 5 is that it creates 30,000 jobs in Ontario pretty well, at those refineries, mainly all at Sarnia. If they shut that down, half of Sarnia basically Sarnia would be crippled. There'd be just nothing left. 30,000. I think the population is about 70,000.
What would it take to change the trajectory of the pipeline? I don't even know, why aren't they doing that right now anyway?
We couldn't build Energy East, remember? That was shut down.
Absolutely outrageous. Parker, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate this.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark.
Check out Parker Gallant's terrific blog, Parker Gallant Energy Perspectives blog online for great stories, really in-depth coverage of our energy sector. And I got to take a break, commercial break, back with more on Newstalk Saga 960 and the Mark Petrona Show after this.